Johnny Puakea, welcome, buddy.
Thanks.
Give me a little skin.
Good to have you.
I'm stoked to have you here. Thanks so much for
I appreciate it.
taking the time to come. And it's fun. It's kind of been like my month of the Hawaii contingency. I have you here, super stoked. I had Brett Maramoto, who you know, Keone Watson, who you know. Right. There's some young women that were in here a few months ago. I think you probably know Emma McDonald and Collie Wilding.
Yep.
K1 paddlers going. So yeah, I'm stoked to have the Hawaii contingent in here. I'm stoked. So thanks so much. So for the people that don't know you, in quick overview, Johnny is an international paddling coach. You have a huge paddling background, incredible boat builder. Puakea Designs is your company. As I always say, like half the butts that paddle outrigger in California and probably the U.S. and beyond their butts are in your boat or your boats, and there are many there. And we'll talk all about your creative side and boat building and how that started, because there's a lot of history there that I'm really excited to dig into with your family and others. So we'll get there. Right. But yeah, like it's really cool, and we'll talk about the whole path from growing up in Hawaii through your path in paddling into coaching at the elitist level, not elitist, but at an elite level, very elite level, and then building boats and small boats, big boats, and where you are today. So we're just going to connect the dots, flow all the way through.
It's a long story.
It's a long story, but I'm excited about it because we were talking before, and you threw some little tidbits out, and I was like, see, that's why we do this. So the goal is to kind of shine a light on your whole story, because as I said, anybody that knows you is in the outrigger paddling world really knows you by name. But my guess is that the majority of people know you as a boat builder and coach, and you do all these clinics and you're all over the place. But what got you here? That whole first half is what I'm super curious. And we'll talk all about what you are doing today and how, but like the formative stuff. And anytime somebody grows up in Hawaii, and what little I know about your upbringing, like that's super interesting and intriguing to me to kind of dig into. So that's what I'm hoping to find today.
Oh,
we'll find plenty.
I'm open, yeah.
Sick, awesome.
Yeah, just ask the questions.
I will,
yeah.
I promise. Awesome. Well, we're just going to go chronologically. We're going to touch on all those things. We're going to start at the beginning. So if it's cool, let's jump right in.
Okay.
So you grew up in Hawaii.
I did.
Tell us about the family and what that was like.
Well, I was born in Pennsylvania.
Oh.
And then my mom, my grandfather, my grandmother, and I, when I was 3 years old, they decided to drive to the West Coast, hop on a plane, and go to Hawaii. And
why? Do you know why they decided to do that?
Well, my aunt was living in Hawaii, and she was like, "Hey, this is the best place ever. You guys should come."
Especially when they're going, "Hey, it's winter in Pennsylvania."
Yeah. And my grandfather had, you know, he was a guy who, I mean, he had spinal meningitis and one of the only kids on the block to live, and he was electrocuted when he was 19 and survived, and then he fell 6-7 stories in an elevator shaft, and no one found him for like hours.
This is your grandfather?
Yeah, and then they took him to the hospital and kind of let him be to pass away, you know? And his mom came in as a story and raised hell, and then they sort of said, okay, we'll work on him a little bit, and he survived. But when he landed, his hip went 3.5 inches up this way. It broke.
Like up into his rib cage?
Yeah, and it just kind of went, I mean, it went up, and then they just let it heal, so there was no operation or anything. So he was always sort of in pain on the East Coast. And I always remember, because growing up, he would glue his own shoes together. One would be like 3 inches taller. His slippers, he would grab like 3 of them and put them together and glue them. Wow. And if he got hit by it, it was not so good because it's so big, right? But no, so he always walked with a cane, but he was in a bunch of pain in the wintertime.
Because of the cold and the moisture and all that.
So they said, hey, let's go, you know, things with, I had never met my real dad. So a lot of people don't know that. So at 3 years old, my mom was like, this isn't working for me, the family, and we're out. So we hopped in a car and went to the West Coast, and my aunt said, come here. We were on a plane, and when I was 3, I was in Hawaii.
Where in Hawaii did you guys go?
She was in Kaneohe.
So that's the east side of Oahu.
Yep, and we stayed with her for a few months. Then they found a place in Waimanalo, which was beautiful.
Where's Waimanalo?
It's on the east side near Rabbit Island, Makapu, Sea Life Park area.
So that's like southeast side?
I think it's pretty, yeah, I guess it's kind of southeast, yeah. But Waimanalo was super gnarly to be white growing up. So they were like, have a nice day, Johnny, you know? And I was like, oh my God, I got to go do this again.
How old were you?
I went from kindergarten until I was 12 in Waimanalo, yeah.
So the stories that we would hear growing up here in California surfing, it's like you hear, I always use the term, it was heavy.
It was,
right?
it was.
Especially as a haole white kid.
I think there was like 2 kids in the school that were white, you know, and it was hard. Yeah.
Define hard. What was that like growing up there?
It was, if you were haole white at the time, right, you weren't really welcomed in those areas. It was pretty hardcore locals. And I think a lot of it stemmed from the past in Hawaii and what had happened with, you know, the takeover and everything. And I feel like that kind of got people not so stoked, right, on the white people in a sense. But growing up in that area was, I mean, every day you were picked on, or I was in fights 3 times a week. And it's kind of like the West Side and being white out there, you know.
Oh, wow.
It was,
well, you know, it's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, Keone Watson was in here and he talks about his was a totally different because of his parents were both teachers. And as a result of that, he had what he referred to as protectors. The Kealanas kind of took him in, and his ended up being because he was a good kid and respectful. And
you learn that, though.
You learn that.
You
he
do,
made it very
yeah.
clear to me. You learn that very quickly.
There's consequences for everything you do there at that time, you know, and you're not cocky, you know, you don't shoot your mouth off. You start to understand this is how it works, and I'm the minority here, and if I'm okay and cool, then usually my day's okay, you know. But there was the occasional, occasional
wow, yeah,
confrontations that you had to deal with. You know?
We heard about that all the time, but
yeah.
That's got to be.
But it's good. It teaches you a lot. You know, it does. It teaches you a lot about life, and you know when to open your mouth, when not to, and what happens if you say the wrong thing. And
has that influenced you as an adult? Like, has that stayed with you in some way?
Absolutely, my whole life.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then my mom, when I was 8 years old, my mom met my dad who raised me, you know, Bobby Puakea, and you know, he's Hawaiian, right? So I was raised by a Hawaiian family, you know, my grandfather, my grandparents on his side, brothers, sisters, half brothers, and all this stuff going on. And then, so I was going to school and getting picked on for being white, but being raised by the Hawaiians. And it took quite a long time till people really understood. I think, you know, so my aunt had this Tahitian studio, and she played on the Ala Moana stage. She had a big program.
Program like what? Is this like
a halau, basically, you know, hula and Tahitian. And at 5 years old, I got pulled in, right? It was like, okay, I remember every time my foot hits the ground, you're gonna hit the drum. Right, and the full get up, you know, the skirt and the whole tea leaf and everything. And then I remember as this went on, then I learned to, you know, fire dance and knife dance. But it was every Sunday for 20 something years. And I'd be at the Ala Moana stage and someone from school would be there, you know, and they'd, hey, I saw you in the stage the other day. And half the time I was like, no, don't tell anybody, you know.
What percentage of the people that come to those are local versus
mostly
tourists?
Yeah, that was mostly tourists.
Yeah. So it's like one of the luau's you could go to if you're staying at the hotels, more or less, right? But more of a Tahitian style.
But I remember there was a talent show. We moved to Kaneohe, or Kaneohe Bay Drive, and I remember going to school there and thinking, oh, this is super minor. This is easy compared to Waimanalo, right? I can do this. And then there was a talent show, but there was still some heavies back then in that area. You know, there was some. You still watched yourself as you went to class in different areas, but
different, right?
Not as bad, you know, not as gnarly. And there was a talent show, and then all of a sudden, my dad goes, oh, "Why don't you do the knife dance?" Right? So he got out there and he played the taweri, and I got up there and I did this like knife dance thing, and he was gnarly. He had like this fro and a goatee, and he was just this big moke, you know. He was like a gnarly looking Hawaiian guy. And everybody's like, oh, I remember school, oh, your dad's a moke. Like this, so that changed my whole image.
Where did that name?
I have no idea.
Okay, got it. But it's a term that you can use because you're Hawaiian. It was your dad, but you would as a haole, you would never use that term.
Well, you used it if you'd hear it at home, like, oh wow, there was a bunch of mokes over here. Watch out, you know, don't go in that area. But they were just bigger guys that were locals that were ornery sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I've had this conversation so many times. Growing up here as a surf kid here, that's all we knew about. But it was old school. Like, it wasn't social media. Like, but you would hear all the stories about going to Hawaii. That's why Brett Maramoto's story was so, like, he moved over there when he was, you know, the 12 days after we graduated high school, he moved over and he's never come back. But we always talked about how heavy it is over there if you put yourself in the wrong place
Yeah.
or the locals, et cetera, et cetera. And I know it's a little different.
And don't get me wrong, once you get to know people and they understand you and it's family, right? I mean, it's amazing. It's truly amazing. It's just this, it was just a thing back then, you know? Yeah.
It's interesting. All right. The knife dancing, fire dancing.
Yeah,
So,
the whole deal.
So tell more about your family. Your mom marries your dad, this Hawaiian multi-generational family. You move into Kaneohe. It gets a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about like school and sports and what you were doing other than the Tahitian stuff.
I was just wanted to surf every day, right?
Oh.
That's everybody in Hawaii was that way, you know, growing up. And so I'd surf wherever we could. You drive to the North Shore when you can. You go out in Kailua area or wherever you could find some beach break or whatever it was. And that's all I cared about, you know. And then when I was 16, the high school had a paddling program. So
What high school?
It was Kalaheo High School. So my dad had, you know, his dad was a koa canoe builder, you know, carving out of logs, and my dad as well. But they had a koa canoe that was in the family, that was sitting on the Hawaiian homestead land in Hilo. And we went there for a family reunion. It was just in the shed, you know, and had gotten a bunch of cracks in it from sitting for so long, and it was for 20 years maybe or something or whatever it was, just sitting there. So I go to school and I'm at this paddling program, and I tried baseball and basketball and football, and none of those things worked for me. If I wasn't on the water, I was just the last guy picked for basketball. I mean, that's how I was, you know.
I resemble that comment. So I get you.
And then I remember telling the coach, "Oh, my dad's got a koa canoe," and he goes, "Really?" And he goes, "I want to meet your dad." So then he met my dad. They started talking, and he goes, "Oh, we should bring that koa canoe to Oahu." So they did, and then my dad fixed it up with my grandfather in the yard, you know, because one side of the yard was for canoe building eventually, and then paddle building, and then the whole yard was just a bunch of shops basically around the whole yard.
Okay, we're gonna we will definitely dig more into that. Super interesting.
So he fixed up his koa canoe, which was called Hilo Boy at the time, and there was 2 logs that my grandfather and a few other people had cut down in Hilo. One was Hilo Boy and Hilo Girl. So when he rebuilt it, he changed the name, and he calls it now Ho'ola, right? Which means new life. So they did that, and they created a Ko'olau Canoe Club, one of the clubs over there. And so 16 years old, and this is all kind of going on, and my dad gets re-involved in outrigger again. Right now he's got the bug again, because he was a musician for a long time and then went into working at Hyatt Regency and did all their koa work and took care of all their stuff. So he gets like back into it, and at 16, 17, I'm like, I'm gonna go back and surf. So I just surfed for a couple of years, and when I was 19, 20, I got back into paddling again, and by then he had started coaching and was involved with clubs, and then I kind of got into paddling a bit, but the surf ski was what kind of really took me off, because surf ski started getting popular around that time. It was Grant Kenny and the guys, from Australia were coming over doing really well. Marshall Rosa and Bob Tugut and all these guys were kind of creating this racing series.
So real quick,
Yeah.
just for anybody listening who doesn't know paddling, because I always say it's not a paddling podcast, but when I have somebody like you, there's going to be a lot about it. What's a surf ski?
Surf ski is a closed kayak made for the ocean, racing boat.
And that's what I paddled.
Yeah, right. That's what you do. And they were, life-saving at the time. So it kind of started happening in Hawaii. So I jumped on one, and me and my 2 friends would be like, "Oh, these things are great. We can go surf that wave way out there," right? So we would just go every day and catch waves and come back in and race out and race back in. And then they were like, "Oh, you should race. You're going kind of fast." And I started racing, and I started going really fast. And that just sort of took me from the surfing, troublemaking kid days to, okay, let's try this for a while, because you kind of got a knack for it, right?
So even though outrigger was like the legacy in your family, and we're going to talk about it because I really we'll even share when you talked about koa canoe or the koa outrigger, like we'll talk about that because that's incredible, and there's so much history and mystique around it, and the age and all that stuff. We'll talk, and even I wasn't like your house, like your yard. Oh, half of it was, all shops. Like how cool. So it sounds to me like a lot of your life is generational and osmosis. You were around boat building. You were around 24/7 music. You were around were around all these things and these people. And I'm guessing when you're building a 40-foot koa canoe, there's a lot of people working on it, and you're spending time with some of these.
Well, it was my
right?
dad and my grandfather, but it was actually quite small, and myself doing it, right? There wasn't a lot of people. And a lot of his stuff was, you take these old canoes that were 40 years old or built in the 40s, and you cut them and make them faster because times are changing, right? And you got to stay within specs. But the surf ski to me I loved it because I could go on my own. It was my own thing. And I was in control of my speed, right? And I was just a speed freak. How fast can I make this craft go every day, right? I just enjoyed it.
At that time, there's 6-man outrigger.
Yep.
There's surf ski, which is one.
Was one man wasn't really happening.
Okay.
At that point, I mean, this is
so you
a
had
long time ago.
Yeah. So what you're talking? What
Yeah.
years are you talking when we're talking?
80.
80.
Yeah, I started paddling in '76 when I was 16, and that was old at the time for a lot of people.
So I didn't ask, and it's not important. So do you have a 5 in front of your age? How old are you?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No.
Really?
I have a 6.
You do?
Yeah.
What do you guys drink in Hawaii?
It's the ocean, man.
It's incredible. It's the elixir. There's so many people in Hawaii. When I'm fortunate to spend a lot of time over there, and I know a lot of people, and it always blows my mind that they're always a decade older than I ever would have guessed.
Well, it's different over there, right? I mean, it's about outside, it's about the nature, it's about the family, it's about simple. It's about having a good time, you know?
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk more about that too. You were sharing some stuff with me earlier that I really want to dig into too. Okay, so going back, your surf ski.
Yep.
And were there races at the time?
There were.
You could, okay, because it was new. So I paddle surf ski a lot.
Yeah.
And the boat, and my dad had a surf ski back in the 80s. The difference between the boats, and I think this can be said about everything in your boat building world, we'll talk about that too, but the surf skis, like the speed skis of the day, compared to today, are night and day.
So different.
The stability back then, they were so tippy.
Well, the seats were high, right?
Yeah.
Because they were life-saving boats.
Right.
And I spent a week flipping over in the water learning that thing. I was just cussing and throwing my paddle. I couldn't, it was in Kailua where it's windy and it's rough and you're learning in this stuff. And eventually I got it. But the cool thing about ski was it got me into, I was 24 and I'd never left the islands. I wanted to see the mainland, Disneyland, whatever, right? I mean, what people are talking about. And I had such good starts off the races that someone came to me one day and said, "Oh, you should get in a K1 and try out for the Olympic Festival team."
K1 being a one-man kayak, racing kayak.
K1, flat water, sprint racing, 500-meter events, right?
I tell the story about how I've done about 12 strokes in one, and then I was in the water, and that's all I've done.
They take a while to get used to. Yeah.
There's a very steep learning curve on that one.
So I remember thinking, okay, and they say, so if you make the team, you travel for free. So it was like 6 weeks before the Olympic Festival trials. And the Olympic Festival back in those days was the U.S. put on a mini Olympics. Every year there wasn't an Olympic Games. And it was all the events, everything at somewhere, at some state, we called it an Olympic party because it was just so much fun. So like, okay, well, if you go to Sacramento and you make the team, which you got to be in the top 6, you'll travel for free. So I sold my Jeep. I bought a K1 6 weeks before the trials.
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Was there a club training in Hawaii at the time?
There was a few guys. There was a couple guys that had the Olympic dream. Bob Toogood, this guy Kalai Hanley, Marshall Rosa. They've all kind of dabbled in that a bit, right?
And where would you train?
I trained in Kailua, Hawaii Kai, or not, the Enchanted Lakes. So where Buzz's is, at Kailua Beach, if anybody knows it. There's a canal there, and it opens up into a big lake in the back.
I didn't know that.
And it's flat water. It's not the cleanest. There's giant barracudas. There's all kinds of stuff going on, So I just jumped in and said, if I make the team, I travel for free, right? So flipped over a bunch of times and flew to Sacramento. And the story, three of us from Hawaii get in a van with guys. We're driving up to 5. It breaks down. We're spending the night in the van, get to the trials, and I squeezed onto the team. And
wow.
6 weeks later, I was at the Olympic Training Center.
Where?
Lake Placid.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What year was it? What year?
That was 86. Yeah.
Gotcha. And so where did that go?
Well, I was training for 88.
In L.A.?
Yeah, L.A., the Olympics in 88 were Seoul.
Oh, I'm sorry, 84 was
84
LA.
was L.A. And I remember, I was doing everything I could, two times a day, and everything it took, and working in the middle of the day to make it happen. And then I was going fast. I mean, on path to go to the Olympics, right? And I got injured. I kind of blew out my ulnar nerve doing pull-ups, a training session. And that took me right out of that Olympic thing.
So you were in it and out it pretty quick.
Yeah, about a year. But I was lucky. I mean, I got fast really quick.
Just had it.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. We're going to get right back to this, but we skipped over. So you're 24 when you start doing this. You said you're surfing, you're paddling ski, you're working. What were you doing for work back then?
Anything, building houses,
Gotcha.
driving trucks, like whatever I could find.
And so was college ever on your radar?
No.
Wasn't
It was.
I saw the look in your eyes.
It was. There was talk about it, but I wasn't much of a school guy.
Well, listen, both Brett and Keone talk about NSU, North Shore University.
That's what I did.
You did North Shore. Maybe you did what? It would be the Downwind University.
No,
Flatwater University.
When I graduated high school, I was like, okay, I'm going to take a year and just surf, and that's all I did.
Did you ever compete surfing?
No, I was never at that level.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I did it enough to have fun, but I wasn't like those guys.
Yeah, I'm right there with you too. Yeah. I wasn't like that. I wasn't there on paddling. I wasn't there on surfing, but I had fun doing all of it. So you blow out your elbow. Mm-hmm. What happens to paddling from there?
Well, I kept trying to make it, right? So I'd go back out, and I knew two other guys who had the same injury, and they wanted to either reroute the nerve or shoot you up with cortisone at the time. And I didn't want to do either. And they did the rerouting of the nerve, and it didn't really work with them. So I kept I would just go back out on my ski and just catch waves and have fun. Like, that's all I did. And I didn't compete for 3 years. Then I went to the doctor, and he did, put electricity here and measured how long it took to come through, because it's a funny bone nerve, right, was the one that went out. Yeah, and he goes, yeah, the nerve's restricted. We can either reroute it or give you some cortisone. I said, no, thanks. And he goes, but it won't get worse if you use it, he said. It's like, that's it. That's all I need to hear. And I just started paddling again and racing again in outrigger mostly, and a little bit of ski.
Okay, so you start pivoting over to outrigger this time.
Yeah, I did. And I ended up with a group of guys that we had this coach who was like a stickler on technique. I mean, he was crazy on technique. It was David Kalama, right, from Waimanalo. And he had been friends with a lot of the marathon guys.
Dave Kalama, or
different one?
Different,
yeah.
Okay.
And his connection was the marathon paddlers who were, kind of up to date on whatever the technique was at the time. And he pushed us really hard on this, and we went really fast as beginners because we had really good technique. So I get back into outrigger, and sooner or later it's just stopped hurting.
Oh, rad.
But right at that time, Billy Whitford, who had kind of got me into took me into K1ing when I first came to the mainland. Hey, come stay at my house. Typical Billy, right?
So Billy Whitford, his name comes up in here all the time.
Yeah.
Newport Aquatic Center, executive director. If you're in the paddling world, you know Billy.
Yeah, and he creates things like that, right? He's just amazing. So he goes, yeah. So he says to me one day, he goes, well, if you're not going to go, because I kept trying to kind of get back into the K1 and race, but every time I really pushed it, I would blow something out because my base wasn't there, and trying to go too fast too soon and being injured, right? He goes, if you're not going to go to the Olympic Festival as a paddler, you'll go as a coach. And he signs me up as a coach for the West team, because it was North, South, East, West that competed. And then before I knew it, I was coaching.
So Billy says, hey, kid, we're going to get you in the coaching world. He did the same thing with Willie Reichenstein. Right. So interesting. I love that guy. He's going to be in here one day. One day I will get him in here. His story is another one.
Yeah, he's an amazing
And it's all interlaced with everybody that's been in here on the paddling side. So there's, I think we're at the point where there's two things happening at the same time. You're paddling, 6-man outrigger, and you're starting to coach. Yeah. Which way should we go? You want to talk coaching or outrigger paddling?
Well, the paddling took a back seat because when I was starting to coach, I had these 3 young kids 16-year-olds, I was teaching them K1. And I had been around Billy, and the coach at the time for the U.S. Olympic team was, we're all Europeans. Paul Podgorski and Jerzy, who's now I think he's with the Slovak team, and very, very, some of the best in the world, right, when it comes to teaching, because the U.S. had hired the European coaches because they were the best in the world. And at the time, that's when Greg was getting his gold medals, and the U.S. was very good at the time, So I kind of had been around these guys a little bit, so I understood a little bit about what they taught. And I started working with kids, and I had a knack for picking out things that are wrong pretty quickly. And then eventually I became like the national development coach for the U.S. and coaching at a Lake Placid for 10 summers in San Diego, and traveling around and working with the coaches who were my coaches from Europe for about 10 years. So like these guys, I would now go to the training centers and I'd be part of the coaching staff. So I'm on the motorboat with Olympic athletes and top coaches in the world, and learning their training plans and their physiology and psychology and technique. And so I was just surrounded by it, right?
But it sounds like boom, you made it. Did it happen that fast, or was there some formative time from the time that Billy said, "Hey, Johnny, come be a coach"?
It went pretty. I got thrown into it pretty quick, and I think I was lucky, right? Because I had either been around enough people or saw enough things to figure out how to say it to people. So it's more than knowing how to do it. It's more about how you say it to someone as a coach. So as that time went on, I feel like it went really quick. I was getting results with the teams. The kids I got along with great that I coached. I was a lot of juniors, kind of trying to take them from a national level to an Olympic level. And I had all the resources. I mean, I'm at the training centers, I'm with these coaches, right? So I learned a lot really quick.
And that doesn't happen without people recognizing that you're a good coach, right?
Yeah, I guess they brought me in because I guess.
What do you think? Yeah. So your dad was a coach too, right?
He did. He coached Lanikai Canoe Club for a super long time.
So was this osmosis too? Did you grow up around a coaching mentality, or was it because of the coach that you had early on with K1, or is it just a natural?
It started with, I think, Dave Kalama, who was our coach for outrigger, he knew what he wanted us to do, and then I was steering. So he kind of made me in charge of the crew. So they were my responsibility. So I think a lot of it started there, to where, okay, disciplined on every motion, every bit of technique, everything you do, how you think. And then I go to this Olympic training center, and I'm getting all these other people's, and it was different, right? Old school Hawaii was go down there around the tree, come back, right? I mean, it was literally, we'd show up at Kailua Beach, 5:30, it gets pretty rough out there. It gets kind of big. And, okay, go down to the canal and come back. It was about 6 miles or something. And it's pitch black. Change 3 guys, go out to Waimanalo, and now you're in the open ocean. And it's dark, and you're hearing waves breaking all around you, and it's big, and you're stressing, and there's no covers. You just got a bailer.
And you're responsible.
Yeah, and it's like all up to me, right? So I kind of had all that happening. But when I went from that to the Olympic training centers and saw how they did things, was way less intense, in a sense. I think that taught me a lot, because the coaches were funny, but they really knew what they were doing. So there was this lightness about it, but this intenseness about it. So the training was intense, and like you couldn't be 1 minute late, because if you missed the bus or the van going to the lake, you had to throw your shoes on and run to the lake. It's 3 miles away to try to catch the team. But when you were training, it was never yelling at you. Mm. Never go hard. You should do it. It was nothing like that. It was just like, so that really stuck with me.
And so from a coaching perspective, what's your coaching style?
I think I'm very demanding when it comes to what I want my athletes to be doing, but I try not to be intense. I guess there's different types of intense. I expect this, and this, and I usually expect it because they tell me I want to get here. And if somebody comes to me and says, I want to get here, I'll say, okay, well then it takes this and this and this. And if you tell me that, then you better do it. But I'll make it fun along the way.
Well, that's I think the magic part I'll do it in a question. In your opinion, has there been a shift in coaching over the last couple decades to where it used to, in some cases it was just crack the whip, and now it's more maybe a balance of what you're talking about?
I think so.
Or has it always been the best coaches always provided that?
I think it was a lot more hard, like get out there. And I think it still is now. Like you still have coaches that are very like, get out there, do it. Duh, you have to, right? I mean, I don't even say win. I mean, that's a word I don't use, or I try not to, right? But I teach, this is what it takes to get there, technically, physically, strength, mindset, and what are you doing that time, that time of year, and what is your mind thinking, and what are your goals? And I think if you have all this, it's so intense that you don't want to be hard on the water to people, right? Because they want to get there already. Like if you're working, I'm lucky. I work with a lot of high-level paddlers, and they want to get there. So all you got to do is have your act together and try to get them there.
Got it. So there's the headspace piece. Thank you for that headspace piece of it, and I really respect that outlook. I always talk about, people will remember their best coach and worst coach, or best teacher, worst teacher. In the middle, they're kind of vanilla, but you want to be like your best one and don't be like that one. And you put that in a pot and stir it. You hope you turn out with like the best attributes from those people that have influenced you.
You do, and in the beginning, old school days, the hardcore, that taught you to work.
Yeah.
That taught you how hard you got to work to get there,
Yeah. But the other side of it, as I was going, is technique. How do you teach technique? And how important is that?
It's everything to me. You can't go fast without having really good technique. Let me rephrase it. You can go pretty fast in the surf without having really good technique, right? But if you can't go really fast and get to your top level without having really good technique, because technique's the only thing that, to me, is the only thing that makes you better instantly. You can train harder, you can do more weights, you can run more hills.
Technique is the only thing that makes you better instantly.
Yeah, make you faster instantly. You change one thing in your technique, you can increase your speed, right? It's your training of your strength and your conditioning and your repetition. And you can do that you can have all those things and be fit and strong, and if you don't have good feel and good mechanics, you won't hit your potential. You just won't. Your ceiling becomes smaller. So if you have a really good technique and you have these other things and you have talent and your genetics and whatever it takes, that's when you start seeing these really high-level people.
So let me pick it. I think that's brilliant. And I think it's maybe fairly common sense, but I think we miss that a lot. If I train harder, if I go faster, if I go every day. So let me ask you this. If somebody has flaws in their technique, how do you as a coach fix it, help them fix it? Like how do you help somebody that's got everything going for them, desire, demand, fitness, but they're slow, and it's a technique
and
thing?
It happens, right? You see it.
I might be one of those guys. I might be asking for selfish reasons.
So a lot of it is feel, right? And if you listen, like the Tahitians are so good now, right? And I've been lucky enough to be around some of their coaches who are phenomenal that helped me with what I teach now. Because what we taught in K1s is a little different than what we're teaching now in outrigger. But the only difference is the craft's moving slower and you have less time in the air. Just little things, right? But when you have, when you're trying to teach someone technique, most of the time people will, what I find the biggest issue is people try to pull the paddle a certain speed. And it's whatever they feel they want it to be, right? When they say feel, it's did you lock the blade and did you wait till the boat got there? Because that's efficiency, right? And if you learn to put the blade in at a certain point, load it, and you wait till the boat gets there, you're efficient. And then you learn how to do that with a lot of pressure, without slipping, without pulling it faster. A lot of people put the paddle in, they want it to come back at a certain speed, and that's not the speed that the canoe is moving.
But so let me ask you this. So words, we were mentioning a friend that everybody's trying to help this guy get faster. Words only go so far. So as a coach, if I came up to you and I said, hey, Johnny, I love to paddle, but I'm really slow. How can you help me get faster? Like do you go, hey, let's go, let me get in the boat and go next to you?
The first thing you want to do is take a look at what they look like on the water. And as soon as you see someone, okay, like if you're doing a lot of this coaching, like, okay, well, they're missing the front of the stroke, or they're slipping at this point, or this hand's going here, or this hand's going right. And then your job as a coach is, how do I find the words that this guy's brain understands that changes his actions, right? And if you really think about, and it's usually drills. Like if you're out there and you're like, okay, someone goes, okay, move your top hand here and you're going to get faster. And you go and you move your top hand there. I rarely see anybody that I work with and I can get their hands in one spot and say, this is your mechanics that you're looking for with this load and this feel. Within 3 to 4 strokes, they're back to their habit. Almost everybody I've ever seen. So it's drills. This is my issue. First you find out what are the biggest issues hurting their speed. You come up with a drill that addresses that they can work on. you practice that for 66 days, you might make it a habit, right? It's a long path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Because I think many of us want to get faster and whatever, if we're runners or cyclists, but it gets down when you, like I know that I plateau in certain things. And for me to get to the next level, I can only add so much more load. It's going to be technique. So I have a funny Johnny Puakea coaching story because it was me. So you are one of the, well, before I tell my story, let's talk about Molokai. You spent a lot of time in the Molokai channel, on the Molokai channel as a coach for the 6-mans, et cetera. Let's talk about Molokai and the channel, and then I'll tell my story because it relates to it.
Well, the channel's, it's its own animal, right? I mean, Molokai gets rough. The conditions change through the race. It gets really big in the middle. It can, if the current's doing a certain thing, the tide's dropping, you're going to have currents off certain areas and certain depths. You have a lot of conditions that change. You got the whole Pacific Ocean coming in between two islands with the trade winds that have blown for days, creating wind swell and ground swell that's moving fast, right? And now you get out there, and the thing with the channel is it's never right behind you. It's not a surfing race. You can use stuff, cornering, etc., right? So you get out there and you have this, you start on Molokai, you start out, it's pretty good conditions behind you, everybody's having a happy day. It starts getting to the middle, gets a little bigger, starts coming from the right, and then you start getting closer to the island, about an hour off, right? And when you're about that hour off is when everybody starts. That's where I say the race starts. Because you have to be using the ocean, you have to be conserving, you have to be smart, you have to be on the right course. And then when it gets harder, when it's closest to the island, and the island doesn't look like it's gonna get any closer, that's when the mental part comes in, right? And the better, like for me, if you're trained properly, the better your technique, the longer you maintain speed, right? And it's not about going fast or trying to go faster at the end. Racing's about having the boat speed, and the less you lose by the end, the better you end up, right? And that's where your efficiency and every training comes into play.
The less you lose.
Yeah.
You're known as one of the premier guys to have in your corner on that channel because you know all of those things about it.
Well, I know I like to, I have good friends who've taught me a lot about the channel, and over the years we discuss I always say, people say, I want to be here, here, and here in the channel. I always say, I don't want to be here and here in the channel. This is where I know where not to be. But I have friends, underwater engineers and stuff that, we talk before the race and we come up with an idea, and then we do the race, and then we have dinner after the next week and we discuss, did it do what we thought? And over all the years, you start to make less mistakes out there.
So let me ask you that. Thank you for that. So if you're a California paddler, whether it be outrigger, surf ski, prone, how do you train for a channel? I think you're going to say, get a really good person on your boat to direct you. But how do you train for those conditions if you live here?
You go there.
Is there any other way?
No. I mean, you can find bump.
Yeah.
But it's organized here, right? You can find backwash and off the rocks and kind of stuff here, but you don't get that big ground swell that's moving fast with things coming across each way that are running and that you got to change angles. Most people, when they come over and they're training for Molokai, they want to learn to be better in Hawaii. They're always chasing the ground swell that's heading to shore, the obvious one, right? So you just see them, they're on the course, and all of a sudden they start running it towards the shore, right? And they're going here and they're riding bumps, but they're not going any farther ahead. They're just in a different path at that point. They need to learn, okay, how do I get this wind swell to get me speed to get on this ground swell, to get off of that ground swell fast enough to find that wind swell, to maintain, that stuff takes time out there.
Well, and that's why the Hawaiians and the Australians, they spend a lot of time over. They've gotten to be very, very good in the channel.
And they get pretty good water in Australia, South Africa. You look at Oscar and those guys.
Yeah. So my story, you just actually shined a light on everything that I did wrong. For the last time, so I've done Molokai 3 times, each time as a 2-man prone. This is all prone with a team. The last time, I don't know, 10 years ago, I think with Scotty Lincoln, our good mutual friend. And this is a 32-mile prone. We're on a 12-foot board. And you were our boat guy.
Right.
Thank God. But this is the way it went for me. So I'm a much stronger knee paddler than a prone belly paddler because my technique is not as good on my belly. So going back to the technique thing, I am definitely plateaued. In flat water or downwind here in California on my knees, I'm pretty good. Right. But I wasn't there. So I'm in the water there, and I've done it 3 times. It's kicked my butt every time. I've never figured it out. I haven't spent enough time. But you were our boat guy, and it went like, there was 2 things I've told Johnny. I've told the story so many times. The first time I got out of the water, you're like, all right, Mark, I know you like that big one that's coming through, but but I want you to look and see that little warble going against the grain in the face of it. Catch that. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Show me again. I never cracked the code. And then the second one, as I was just saying, knee paddle here is by far my stronger suit. I was up on my knees that same day, and you came up, get off your effing knees. You're slower. You're like a mile an hour slower. Get off your knees. And I'm like, strike two. Yeah, but listen, that's why I ask. Again, self-serving, and for all my friends here that train, that want to do Molokai or do it, but have never had the success they want, that's why I asked.
I mean, you spend a month there, you learn a lot. Yeah. But if you look at the guys, like I had this guy, Mike Judd, he grew up in Kona. I mean, he's, a lot of his life in Kona. He was super fast in the flat. He would come to Oahu and he would get beat in the one-mans, And then he moved to Oahu and he got in the surf more, and pretty soon he's winning. I think it takes a couple years of coming there for a couple weeks at a time or a few weeks at a time, and then you start to learn it. Because even people like Danny, they come over. Now, Danny's, 15 years into this thing now, and he kind of figures it out. But in the beginning of his first 10 years, and Greg Barton, right, gold medalist, Olympics, they get out there in the surf, and they have a hard time because they're going hard at the wrong time. They're riding the wrong bumps. It takes time.
I feel much better about myself now. Thank you. But it was a rude awakening every time I did it, and with your help. From a coaching perspective, from a 6-man outrigger, who are you coaching these days? Because you have the big Catalina.
Yeah, I've been working with the Dana Point women for I think we're about 10 years in now. Yeah. And now it's...
and they're hammers.
Yeah, they paddle well. It's technique, it's training, it's mindset, it's everything. And they're all in, which is nice. When I first started with them, they were quite funny because they didn't really know how to paddle one-mans, and I think it was a bit of a shock of... oh, this is what we need to do. You got to show up at 6 in the morning, and this is Tuesday morning before Tuesday afternoon's technique workout, And I remember the first year I coached them, in 9 months, they were paddling pretty well, together, with pretty good technique and training decent. And then I remember Catalina came, and we start off, and they're keeping up with the team that usually won. And I'm thinking, oh, cool, this is working out well, and they flip over. Oh. And I remember, oh my God, all this 9 months is what I'm thinking. 9 months, and this is where we're at, And then had a hard time getting it back off, but they got back in. We sort of broke it down to, it's like, okay, well, they're about 3 minutes ahead of you, and if you go 1 minute faster an hour, because we still got 4 hours, that means 15 seconds faster every 15 minutes. We just kind of broke it down to that. And they ended up winning. Mm-hmm. And from there, it kind of got to where they started getting, disciplined with technique, disciplined with training, disciplined with mindset. And I was living here for a while, so I had a lot of time with them. And then a couple years ago, I was not coming as much. And Brandy, who was our...
Brandy Basic?
Yeah, she's a good stand-up paddler, very good, phenomenal athlete, right? Firefighter and everything. And she's now the coach there. And I just come in and I do cleanup, which is fun. But she's doing a phenomenal job.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm almost done with the coaching questions, but it's super interesting to me. Is good coaching art or science?
Both.
It's a combination.
You have to know what takes to make something go fast. Like where does the blade need to be? How does it need to hold? What body parts are holding it? What muscles are you using? You have to know the mechanics, but paddling is art. Because you can have all the mechanics in the world and not go fast. Because you have to understand what it feels like.
And at the same time, I would think the inverse. There's some people whose technique's not that good, but they're freaking fast as can be.
Because they have feel. They understand how to grab the water, hold onto the water, put pressure on that blade, and wait till you get there. That's usually what they have.
And I think most people, until they're really competent, none of those things come to mind. I'm just paddling. There's not all the subtle.
Well, I think a lot of it is. I think we teach too much mechanics, which takes people out of the field. Mm. So now my coaching is more, what are you feeling? How do we find that feeling? Because that's really what matters, right? If you don't have the feeling and understand it, the mechanics don't matter. If you have the mechanics and don't understand the feel, you don't go fast. And the hardest part about coaching is, how do you get through to this brain? What words are there? And what I've been doing recently is you'll hear, I've been working with this guy for 2 years and he just doesn't listen. He can't fix his top end, right? So if I come in on a session with someone, my thing is, if you can't fix what I'm trying to tell you right now, like say it's the top hand or bottom hand or whatever it is, don't get frustrated because it's not you, it's me. I'm not finding the words for you to understand, right? Because that's my job. Right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, final question on coaching, or maybe it's even a comment. Like, I'm a huge believer in coaching, whether it's a life coach, a business coach, a sports coach. But I always say, show me. Like, I love to provide coaching to my team, my management team at work, because I've been such a beneficiary of coaching. But I always say to people that say, "Oh, I don't need a coach." Like, I'm like, show me a pro athlete. Kobe had a coach. Everybody needs a coach.
You need that outside input. You do.
And it's not just for paddling. This is for
everything.
Everything.
Yeah,
I believe in that 1,000,000%. And I love you have to find the right words, right? If you're using the wrong words on the right concept, but it doesn't stick to that person, it's the wrong words.
Get back.
Right?
That's the art of it, right?
Yeah.
That's the art of coaching, is finding the words, I think.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. Super cool. I had a question going back to Molokai, just because it came up the other day and it just piqued my thought. So it's a little off topic, but Billy Whitford that you mentioned, executive director at Newport Aquatic Center and worldwide paddle guy, he had mentioned you that one of his best Molokai crossings was with you steering.
92.
Oh, okay. So you jumped right to it.
Yeah.
What was it?
Well, I was one of the steersmen, right? So we had a couple years before, so Billy had an offshore canoe club that he worked with, right? He brought in all the professionals.
And they won Molokai?
If it was flat, they won. If it was rough, they were kind of in it, right? So in '89, they won it because it was flat. They broke the record in the flat, right?
And surprised a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. And before that, it was Illinois Brigade. Right.
It was. I'm sorry. It was.
They
what?
were called Illinois Brigade.
Illinois Brigade.
Yeah, it was all a lot of marathon guys. So you took these professional marathon paddlers, and then you pulled in the Olympic Greg Bartons, Terry Kintz, Willie Rankenstein.
Yeah.
Right? And when Billy got hurt one year, so I steered them 90 and 91 in Molokai, and it was rough. We got like second the first time. We almost won it, but we made a course mistake. I was pretty green at the time, And then the next year we got fourth. It was bigger, but they kind of disbanded in 91. They kind of stopped. Billy stopped doing it or whatever happened. And at the time, we were all K1 guys. We had a ton of guys from Hawaii paddling K1s all over the country, training for the Olympics, but all watermen. All guys that grew up in Hawaii, knew how to surf. Now they got good technique, good training. They understand things. So we said, hey, let's throw a crew together. So we sat at a table. It was myself, Kala Kuke, who's he's passed years ago, and he was just a phenomenal waterman. And his son Nalu, who was that next level in the ocean, right? And we said, let's put a crew together. And we just picked names. Peter Newton,
Just the ringers.
Yeah,
right?
And it was Bruce Blankenfeld, Hokulea, and Willie. Nalu and I had steered offshore when Willie Rankenstein was there. And we both were like, oh my God, this guy pulls 120% every time he takes a stroke.
I paddled with him this morning.
Yeah, and he's just so we sit at the table, and it had to be someone who was involved with the Hawaiian Canoe and Kayak team, which was an Olympic development program. And Willie in the beginning had come over and helped teach C1, so he was connected. So we're like, Nalu and I go, we got to get Willie. And I'll remember, and Kala goes, okay, you call him up. So Willie, you want to race Molokai with us? And he goes, just tell me when to stop, right? And we're like, we got the right guy, right?
I love that guy.
So we got together one day, Friday before the channel. We paddled up the wall of Hanama Bay on the southeast side, and we came back in and we're like, okay, yeah, we're going to race together. Billy Whitford came over to drive motorboat, and we went over, we took boats over, we camped on the beach, we barbecued, had a couple beers, fishing. I mean, it was amazing. And the next day, Australia was top of the game, Grant Kenny and all these, big names. And we'd come off the line and we're kind of in it, and Billy's driving the motorboat. At that time, you didn't need a 22-foot whaler. They want you to have 22-foot boats now because you got to have all the people on there. But at the time, there wasn't regulations on that. So we had a 16-foot whaler, and he's a phenomenal boat driver, right? So he would just do one-man changes every 5 minutes. Oh. So the boat never slowed down. But if you got in and the boat slowed down, everybody knew it was you, right? So we had this sort of...
almost like a seat racing concept, right?
It was scary. I mean, you're with these I'm there with these legends, right? And I'm stroking half the race, and Kala's steering because he's the guru, and halfway into the race, we're kind of in it. And I remember first time I had to get in seat one, I remember thinking, I don't want to get in here. Like, I don't want to be that guy to screw this thing up. You know, we're going so fast. So we're going along, and he goes, oh, you got to get in for Kala.
So you're gonna steer.
To steer, and I grew up steering, you know, doing all that. And I was like, no, I'm not, right? It's really how I went. He goes, oh, you got to go in just 10 minutes. I'm like, no, I'm not getting in there, right? And he basically pushed me off the motorboat and said, get in. And I had a good day, you know, hour and a half, 2 hours later, we were right fighting for first place, you know, and I think we all look back at that year.
Did you guys win it?
Second place.
No.
Just got edged out at the end.
Got it.
And we all look at that as, you know, that was our favorite race ever.
I love that.
The whole atmosphere of it, right? You're with your friends, you respect each other. Nobody's in there thinking they're better than anyone else. It's a rough day, you do well, you're having a good time, you're surprised at how good you're doing. And I always kind of look at this and I say, well, what is winning? Right? I mean, I coach a lot of teams that, you know, win Molokai or whatever it is. But what is winning? Winning is that day you come off the water and you're like, that was the best we could have ever done, and we're going to remember this one, right? So, yeah, so Billy we still talk about it till this day.
Yeah, he brought it up unsolicited, so it had an impact
really
for
cool.
sure.
Yeah.
I love that. What a cool story. You know, Willie Reichenstein was in this chair. He's on the pod, and he talks about his second time ever in a six-man outrigger, they won Molokai.
Yeah.
Second time ever in one. That's got to be.
Well, they were hammers. I remember
great.
the first time I steered them, I show up and down to go paddle outside of Waikiki a couple days before Molokai, and they're talking and they're looking around, and I'm thinking, these guys just won Molokai, right? And all of a sudden, I go, let's go hard for a little bit, and I was
Boom.
Oh, hang on, man. They had some.
That's so great.
They
Well,
had
you
some
know,
juice, yeah.
you brought up you
Yeah.
brought up your elbow and pull-ups, and one of the things we always talk about with Willie, and he talked about it on the interview, was he used to do sets of 50 pull-ups. Like 3 sets of 50 was his normal pull-up routine. Like, you're like, what? He's unbelievable. It's so fun. Okay, so we've talked all about the coaching, which I love. Thank you. And we talked a bit about your history with boat building and your dad. Let's bring it back to boats. So there's 2 parts of it. There's the history of it. There's the Puakea Foundation, which I'd love for you to talk about. You had started to talk about koa canoes. And I'm going to ask you to just kind of shine a little bit of light of the history. How do you what is a koa canoe?
Well, I mean,
and then we're going to get into Puakea Designs, your modern day business of making.
Yeah, well, the koa canoes, you know, they're logs, very, very old growth, basically, right?
So this is one tree.
One tree.
Carved into a 40-foot long outrigger.
Yeah.
You can imagine, think of how big that log has to be. And then you carve out this tree and turn it into this super efficient hydrodynamic thing.
And, you know, back in the day, it wasn't chainsaws, right? Like, I have some photos at the house that we found. My parents' house caught fire a couple years ago, and we rebuilt it, but, you know, it was only part of the house. So we pulled out all the photos, and we got all this stuff of my grandfather, you know, with the bare feet on the top of the giant log, you know, just chipping away. You know, they would burn it at times so they could get into it, you know, and they would go up to the mountains and find it, and this is the one we're going to do, and the whole ceremony, and cut it down. Now you got to get it off the mountain and down in. You got to let it cure and dry. And
why was there a ceremony around this?
Respect. Yeah. Belief.
And love that.
Yeah.
The history. What got your grandfather into boat building?
I don't know. All I know is I would come home from school and he was really quiet, and he was pure Hawaiian, you know, but he broke horses for Parker Ranch, and then he was a carver or a sharpener. He would sharpen the tools. Mm-hmm. I mean, we'd go they would cut down the trees and they would do their thing, and he would keep everything sharp, and he was one of the builders, right? But back then, after you made the koa log, you had to make the ama for it, right? And that was made out of wili, a different type of wood. And then the yako that went out were made out of hau. And hau, I think, is mangrove.
Like hau bush.
Yeah, I think it's
which
actually,
is like this super invasive, fast-growing.
It's like mangrove, right?
Yeah,
basically. So, but they would go to the mountains and it would grow wild, crazy. And, you know, they're looking for a piece about this big. But they knew the shape they needed to go from the canoe to the ama and how they wanted to pitch. So they would pick here to here.
So master craftsmen.
Yeah, and then they would give me this giant machete, you know, at 16 years old, and I would climb in the tree. They say, cut right there and cut right there. And
so preformed.
Yep, totally. And everything was so sharp, like, don't touch your skin with it, right, kind of a thing. And anyway, so I would just come home from school, and he would just be there with my dad, and they'd be, you know, working on the boat and stuff.
Rad. Can you talk about the history of the Koa canoes. I just love this history because those same boats that you're talking about, that your grandfather worked on, your dad worked on, it's not like they get used for 3 years and they go away. They're still being paddled.
A lot of these were made in the 40s.
So we're coming up on, these are 85-year-old boats.
They've been changed, because there's specs, right? You got to be, this water, you can't be over this, water line, but it's every couple inches back has to be a certain width. Rocker can't have concaves. There's all these little rules in there. So they would be like, okay, because back in the day, the Koa canoes were 38 feet, 40 feet long. Then they went to everything at 44. So my dad would take a lot of those old logs from the clubs who had boats that were built a long time ago, and he would bring them to the house, and he would cut it in half with a skill saw, and he and I would redo it, And then it had to meet specs. So he kind of I learned a lot from him in design because he would make mistakes with the design of the Koas. Like maybe too wide at the bow or this or that, but a lot of times he would push it too far and he'd make it too tight. And I'd come home and it'd just be like this.
Well, there's no putting it back on a...
There is.
On a Koa wood canoe?
I mean,
really?
You've got to router out that area and cut it out and put another piece and then make it bigger and shape it back into...
So is it common for these older boats to be like, they're almost sectional now?
Now they are,
Just for those reasons.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's still some of the old originals that are still one piece.
There's a out at Kualoa Park on the east side. Every year they do a outrigger festival, and there's a lot of Koa canoes that come in there. And there's short ones like the old style fishing boats that are super thick. And I went this year for the first time because I'm helping out my dad's foundation, because he's got this perpetuating the art of Koa canoe building, right? And so he's getting older, so I was there helping out, and they had these 15-foot fishing old school Koa boats, still almost all one log. They had them rigged, and they're on display, but the really cool thing was there's all these kids everywhere, right? The schools are coming in, and they're telling the kids, go paddle this thing. They're not like, you can't touch it, it's super old. So there's all these kids paddling these Koa canoes around there. They're pretty magical because they have a life to them. They have a feeling to it. Yeah.
That's so cool. It's amazing because, again, nothing lasts forever around here, but
those
the fact
do.
that those, right, they do. And they're held in high regard, right? And you mentioned the foundation. So tell us real quick, Puakea Foundation.
So my dad started this foundation where it was basically perpetuating the art of building the canoes. And he's all about the carving of the canoes more than stripping. You can do templates and wood strips, and people do beautiful stuff, all over the world. And Jimmy Terrell did some really pretty stuff. But he's about trying to teach, this is how the heritage of it, right? This is how they were built back in the day. This is how we did it. And he still has the old tools from back in the day. So the people come up and he does some teaching, and he's a little older now, so I'm having to go home Monday and get his Koa canoe ready for Molokai, because his Koa canoe races in Molokai a lot.
Really?
So everything went to fiberglass, right? And a lot of the clubs are afraid to put the Koas out there because they get damaged. They can get damaged. They can break in half. He's had his boat broken in half a couple times, right, out in the middle of the ocean, and he puts it back together. But not everybody has that skill in their backyard, right? So him, Lanikai, and Outrigger Canoe Club usually have a Koa canoe in Molokai every year. So his is going to get lent to a team from Arizona. And it's not quite ready because he promised it out, but he didn't finish it, so I got to go home and do that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Keone talked about the same thing, and I really wasn't very informed about it, but he talks about steering the Outrigger Canoe Club's Koa canoe and how that has
it's
left
a feeling,
such
it's a feeling.
He talks very highly about that. Listen, I love. We're going to get into Puakea Designs. You're modern. As far from the Koa, I'm sure it informed you, and it has osmosis of learning this from your grandfather and your dad, and you've taken it and turned it into this, ultra modern craft. But there was a quote that I picked up from you, which I love because I think it ties the two, and it was basically this. You said, "You can't hold back moving forward because you're scared of losing tradition, but you can't move forward without having tradition."
Yeah.
I love, it really resonated with me. And I think that takes us right into your business, Puakea Designs, which, again, if you've seen any of the best paddlers in the world, lots of them are in your boats. Anywhere I go, that's, 50% or more are your boats. You're constantly coming out with new designs. In fact, what was fun is yesterday morning, Jimmy goes, hey, let's switch boats. So Jimmy Terrell, who was actually here, Quick Blade, we switched, and I jumped in his Kahele with his new Stingray paddle.
Yeah, right.
And I haven't been in an outrigger in a while. It felt so good. I was like, oh.
Well, outrigger, one-mans are fun. You know, they really, I mean, I came from surf ski.
Yeah.
And I got into one, but the cool thing about the one-mans is they carry the bump better. So for surfing, it's actually more fun. You know, it's a little more weight to get on the bump, but once you get on the bump, because you got this narrow hull, you can carry it farther than the ski, right? So they complement each other, but they're...
Well, it's funny because
cool.
You can appreciate this. All my friends are outrigger that I paddle with are outrigger. I come from a surf background and prone paddling background, and I did a lot of stand-up with Jimmy, and I was doing OC1 outrigger for quite a while. My shoulder does not like it. So surf ski it really likes. So I've been on ski for a long time, but my mentality is that of an outrigger paddler, prone paddler, or surfer. Yeah. Most of the surf ski paddlers are not they come out of K1, et cetera. I'm not knocking them. I love them all. Yeah. But I paddle mostly with outrigger paddlers, but my shoulder hasn't been super happy. But I'm like, with these new light boats and Jimmy's new paddle, I'm like, maybe my shoulder.
There's less resistance on that. Yeah. So if you have injuries, that paddle is helpful.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I'm gonna. It got me thinking. So exciting. Okay. Enough about me. Okay. Let's talk about when did you start building boats, and bring us all the way to today.
Well, I mean, you know, I didn't go to college. School bored me. I just was not stoked. Right. I just went because I had to. And had friends, and you know, luckily I was into mechanics, and a lot of my classes were involved in that, so that's kind of what kept me there. But when I was out of college, I was like, okay, I had the Olympic dream, and then what am I going to do, right? And Bob Toogood, who was kayaking, and he was real tight with Oscar Chalupsky, you know, who was one of the legends.
12-time Molokai winner surf ski.
He said, oh, you want a job? Come make kayak paddles for me, surf ski paddles. So I started doing that. And that was supporting my paddling habit, right? And then...
Was that in Hawaii?
It was. And the boat builder quit, the surf ski guy. So he goes, you got to build surf skis now, because he quit. And now I'm in it, right? I mean, it's learning fiberglass and all the misery that comes with that. And over the time, you learn to work with it well. But it was messy. And I'll never be a boat builder. I'm never going to do this for my life, you know?
And yet, here we are. Right?
You know, and then I kind of graduated into when the outrigger scene came, and it started sort of taking off, because Carell Tresnick Sr., he was kind of the guy I feel, I mean, John Martin was in it, you know, and there was a few other people doing little things. But Carell got the Lanikai guys to all paddle one-mans one year that he made for them, because he built them, and they won the channel. And pretty soon, things start taking off, right? And I see this, and I was making surf skis and K1s and things like that.
Where were you building? Where were you?
I had a shop in a shack in Waimanalo for a while. I did it in my backyard for a while. It was all old school kind of stuff.
I was back to Waimanalo, huh?
Yeah, it was. It was beautiful against the mountain with it. It was just gorgeous.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And so, when did you start? So when did you pivot to go, I'm going to start my own brand, or like what was the pathway to?
Well, I was building for people and different things, and then John Martin, who was one of the beginners, he said to me one day, he goes, you can make your own boat. And I was like, no, I don't think I can, right? He says, just get a block of foam and shape it. And I did, and it worked out a little bit. It was funny because there used to be a race from Catalina to Dana Point. It was a relay race that Tim Doherty put on. And I was like, okay, I sent 2 boats over, and they got second and third. And it was, you know,
these were outrigger? Or
yeah, outrigger. One man. It was Mitch Kahn and Rob Pelkey.
Okay, some of the top
these legendary surf ski guys, and they did really well. And everybody was like, "They're not outrigger paddlers. That must be a good boat, right?" So it's sort of that's what got it going for me. Yeah.
When was that?
I don't know, 99, maybe.
And the evolution of one-man outrigger and two-man outrigger paddling out here started around that time, or was there already a base?
It was around then. It started getting really busy.
Got it. Yeah. And it's just grown. So let's keep going. So you make those first 2 boats over there.
Yeah, and I'm learning how to, then I rent a space in a warehouse that my friend sold carpet out of, and got a little corner, and you're making boats, and And as you know, as I was going, I was like, okay, how can I make this thing faster, right? Kind of addicted to speed on the water. So that just sort of got me thinking. I learned a lot from my dad because he would work on some boats that worked and some didn't. So you kind of keep it in your mind, oh, that worked, that didn't, you know. And,
well, you were saying even with your dad, he was trying to,
he was
pushing it. So even though these are traditional boats, he was trying to make them as fast as possible.
I remember
right?
coming home one day and he had the bow of his boat, right? He's got his own coil boat, and it was like it looked like, I don't know if you remember the surf skis, the Burtons back in the day from Australia. They had this really tight bow. They were beautiful. And I come home and it's like just like this, you know. And I look at him, I go, this thing's not going to pass. And he goes, oh, it's going to pass, right? And we paddle it, and it was quick. And you stop paddling, and it would just glide. And then he took it down, got it measured. He's like, it didn't pass. And he had to widen it, right? So in your head, you go, okay, remember that. You know, this bow does this or this does that.
You've got that innovative mindset from Dad, right? Watching, tinkering, constantly looking for speed.
And he was never afraid to change or try something. You know, he's just like, let's cut this boat in half right here. You know, this $100,000 coil canoe. You know.
Well, and we've watched you and other boat builders around here, and like you mentioned Jimmy, like you guys are, and other guys, Micah, who's I think one of your ambassadors, Micah Scott, who's back on Kauai. There's all these boats that have been kind of carved up and patched together, and where you can see them. Like you guys will be paddling them, kind of test driving. I always say that Jimmy is always tinkering. He'll come out with something new. And you're like, what is that thing? And the boat's like, what did you guys do? You cut off the tail and you change this. And so. And you know,
you look down, you're like, well, maybe it's this, right? You just kind of get in there with a saw and go for it.
Is that the process that you use to come up with, like, let's talk about the evolution of your line of boats, because you have a lot of current boats, but it's every couple of years there's something new coming out. And there's a lot of change.
I don't remember how many, but things change, right? Over time, everything evolves. And you're always trying to, as soon as you're finished with one boat, you're trying to think of how could I have made it faster, right? And that's what my mind does anyway. And then, you know, if it does, like I always say, try something new. It's either going to work and you can change it, or it's going in the trash and you just start again, right? And that's okay. And as long as you're not afraid of that, I think it works.
And is that what your creative process looks like? You have this thought and then you're like, all right, let's start tinkering. Are you always building off of an existing, or do you start fresh every time?
I used to build a lot off of existing. And, you know, it was all right? This is what I see. This is what I think I'm going to see under the water. This is the shape I think is going to work and go fast. How does it catch the bump? Is it short enough to fit in the bump? What's the water line, rocker? And you get all this stuff that goes on in your head, right? But now, you know, a few years back, I started learning the CAD program. And now I'm looking at it on a computer. And I'm taking things I knew to the computer screen, and then you do your first boat from a computer, and and it shows up in real life. And you're like, that is not what I thought it was going to look like. So you have that whole learning curve of, it looks like this on the screen, but really, what does it look like in real life? And there's programs that help me with resistance, like what speed I have, what resistance, and I run them through it. And the challenging part of this is, okay, I have this resistance at 7 miles an hour. I'll punch it in from like 7 to 12 or 13 or 14, so I see what the distance, the resistance is at what speeds, right? But this is a straight resistance program. You have a paddle going, pulsating from one side that's pushing, you know, so you got, then you have, okay, it says it's fast, but is it going to fit in the bump in Hawaii or in Hood River, right? And how's it going to work in the flat? So if it's going to work in the flat, will it fit? So there's a lot of things that you got to really get going.
And the computer doesn't give you all of that.
None of it. Right? It gives you like these basic things, right? The rest comes from experience and what you think you know at the time.
Well, what's the holy grail of a boat? Like, if you had a magic wand, it can make the perfect boat. Or I guess I would say the perfect boat would be one that works really good in flat water, really good in the bump. It's, you know what I mean? Like, I've been trying this for 10 years, right? And I always make boats that I know are going to be fast in the flat, but work good in the rough. And you have a fine line there. I mean, Hawaii's only so much, right? And everybody in California wants a boat that they can race on flat days, which is what you always get. But when that windy day comes, they want to have a good time. So you can't just make a flat water boat that everybody in places in the world want to be. Because when that day comes when it's rough, because that's where the fun's at, it's got to work. So you're treading this fine line of flat water speed to rough water speed, and that's why my boats have all gotten shorter. Because before at 20 foot 9, 20 foot 10, my first boat was 22 feet long. A lot of times that water line is only 18 and a half, right?
And then there's boats sticking out of each side. And you get some reserve on the bumps, it helps you and stuff, but that length is going to hurt you on the surf. So I started kind of getting rid of a lot of the boat, but trying not to get rid of much of the water line. So that now I'm getting flat water speed, but I can make a faster boat in the flat, but it's short enough to fit in the bump. But a lot of my canoes over time have been hard to learn. So they'll have really good top end speed, but you got to understand how to paddle it. And that's, you know, so you see these top guys that are on it, they get on and they learn it, they love it because they're just seeing these high end numbers and they can corner well.
They can really,
and they know how to move it around and hold it up on the top of the wave so that you're not dropping it too far. And then, but the beginner will take a little while. So like the Volare that we have right now, it's really doing well. But it took a few years for that boat to really catch on. It's got like probably the top end speed of no other boat out there right now. Ryland hit 20.6 miles an hour in the channel this year. It was huge.
Yeah, Ryland Hart.
Yeah, so you're seeing high numbers. It's fast in the flat, but it's got a learning curve to it.
Well, and what's amazing, that's interesting. What's also amazing is you're watching guys like Danny Ching and Ryland Hart. They're paddling the same boats, same model here in the Catalina channel, relatively flat or flat, as they are in Molokai, anything but.
And it's a hard thing to accomplish because something that's going to be good in everything is going to make you figure it out. You can have boats that are great in the surf and they're easy to learn, but you're not going to get the top end that you're looking for a lot of times. It's just an easy thing, right? And then we all looked at it. We thought these lengths were supposed to be, what are the perfect length and the water line? And as soon as I went shorter was the Kahele was the first boat I ever went short on. It's too short, it's not going to work. Waterline was the same length as my boat that was 20'10".
Interesting.
Right? So then pretty soon that boat caught on because people tried it enough. Then we just came out with the Cantari. Because when I paddled K1s, I paddled a women's boat because I was light. I was under 170. So if I paddled the men's boat, which was called the Eagle at the time, I was slower than the Hawk, which is made for women. Right? You look at bikes, you look at skis, you look at everything. You have, you know, different size boats for different people. So we did this Cantari, which was shorter and really narrow, minimal wetted surface area. And everybody was thinking it was going to be too short, but I made it for people from anywhere from 120. Basically, my goal was 120 to 165. And we're seeing people in 185 in Hawaii liking it because it's short and it fits, right? And that boat has just gone crazy. Because we never built boats for people for their size, like every other sport.
So interesting.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I think, again, I don't want to get too nerdy for people that aren't big paddlers, but like I took a break from prone paddling. When I came back, I called Joe Bark. I'm like, hey, Joe, I need a new one, my Unlimited. And he goes, okay, do you want 16 feet or 16.6? And I was like, yeah, because we'd always been 17.6 to 18.
You get in that mindset,
and
right?
So we went a foot shorter and an inch wider. And I was like, what? And it's incredible. For me, it was a much better boat. Yeah. Because I always say, and I would guess you do, stability over distance equals speed, right?
You got to have stability, especially when you're in a ski or a prone or a stand-up or something, right? You can't paddle hard if you're not balancing.
Yeah, people are always going, oh, I want to go, I want to go narrow. I want no. Make sure you're really comfortable.
So we're lucky with outriggers, right? Because we can get the seats kind of low, and we have the outrigger, the arm on the side. Yeah. So we can go. So the Cantari hull is so narrow, and originally I thought I'd build it for women, and then we said, okay, what if it's too narrow? What's the bad thing about it? Well, it'll be tippy. Well, women have better balance. Let's just do it. And now the guys are all liking it too.
Listen, you look around when I'm paddling and there's no, like, you hear that all the time. Oh, I like this one even though it's not supposed to be for me. I really love that one. Or it's really cool. I mean, the boats today are so, you know, there's really like two top brands, yours and another one. And that seems like everybody's on. And a lot of times I say, like, for me, the boats, it's the final piece is how does it feel to me? In a surf ski, if my butt, that might be the best boat, but if I'm not comfortable in that seat, it's not going to work for me. So there's all these little subtle things for people,
and
right?
how you paddle, right? I mean, if you're this way, if you paddle this way in the water, this boat might work better for you. And and a lot of people get on, and the funny thing, so I talked about the Volare and how it took a little while to take off. You get in that boat, it doesn't feel like it's going fast. And so first time I ever paddled it, the first one we ever made, I got on it and I was out here. The first one came to California. And I went outside the jetty, and I tried to catch a couple of bumps, and I thought, I'm not going to sell any of these things. This thing sucks, right? And then a month later, I learned it, and I was like, oh my God, this thing's amazing. But if you just go by feel, and you don't test the numbers, like a lot of times you got to look at what is my speed no matter what I feel? Because a lot of people can't feel it. But sometimes people get in a boat and it just feels good to them. Fine, that's a boat for you. If you're looking for high-end speed, check the numbers.
Interesting. Yeah, cool. Let me ask, when you're doing the development on a boat, or you're creating, you're coming up, you're brainstorming, you're testing, how do you know when you've got it? Like, how do you say, like, this is it, we're going into mass production with this boat?
I don't know if you ever have it.
Oh.
You know, I don't know if I ever have it. I know if we're close to what we're looking for, but we'll do a prototype, and now we're doing our prototypes a little different. But we'll do a prototype, we would CNC it, take it, glass it, drop a seed in it, take it out in the ocean, do some testing on it. And usually the best way we do it is we swap off from an existing canoe every 10 minutes on a downwind run. Back for an hour. And by the end of the run, you know what boat's better.
Got it.
But now we're 40 pounds because it was a foam plug, and it's going to be 18 when it comes out, right? And this thing's a little rough, and this thing is clean. And now you go, okay, well, what's it going to do when it's lighter? Is it going to be better? Is it going to be worse, right? So we kind of get an idea of, okay, it's doing, I think, what it should do. And then you go send it to production, and it's 3 months or 4 months before you see the boat. And that whole time for me is the most stressful, because what's it going to do when it's light? What's going to happen a little when it's molded or cleaned up? And usually it's always different than the plug, but luckily it's always been a little better.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And so it's really fun to me to think about, like, you growing up with your grandfather and your dad with their canoes, to coming to where you are today with these carbon fiber, as you said, 18 pounds, as high tech as they come, from the manufacturing to what they produce on the water, and they're beautifully manufactured, and it's just amazing to watch. But the other thing I just want to say, because of all that, it's like, and it held for Keone when he was in here, and Brett Marimoto, same thing, didn't go to college, but I would contend you have a PhD in hydrodynamics and boat building and all that goes into it. Like, that's an incredible skill. And total side note, but like, it just reinforces college is not it for everybody. I mean, like, look what you and you guys it's incredible what you've been able to do.
And you learn along the way, a lot of mistakes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I went to college, I might not have made a lot of mistakes, but I probably wouldn't be doing this.
Well, how's it been to that point? Like, how's it been running your own business?
It's good. I mean, running a business, I don't know if I'm good at it, you know? Creating a business, creating product and stuff, yeah, that's good fun. I'm still trying to learn how to run a business.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, it seems like it's working. If you're in business, you're producing incredible craft that people are buying, and you have this incredible team and ambassadors that represent your brand. So let's go over there. So you have, I'm not going to go through the list, but you have some of the best paddlers in the U.S. We'll just focus,
Yeah, we got some really good guys.
And ambassadors.
Yeah.
But what's the makeup for Johnny Puakea and somebody that represents your brand as an ambassador or team member? Is it just skill and what they do, or is there more to it?
We talk about this a lot right now, especially because what I want representing my brand is humility, humble. What are you doing for the community? Mm-hmm. I don't care if you're winning everything, because to me it's not about that. It's great, it helps. It's not for me like, hey, come in here and I want you to race because you're going to win, right? And because the winning is a short-term sale to me. You know, the brand, and if the canoe is better than the other boats out there, eventually there's your long-term. And I'm looking for longevity. And I'm looking for my people to be projecting, you know, we're teaching people in the community. We're helping people in the community. I want to be the brand out there that says, you know, come to us when you're learning, we welcome you. You know, I don't want to be the brand that's like, I got the best guy in the world and this is why we're good. You know, that's not me.
But at the same time, you have some of the best.
Yeah, lucky.
Yeah.
You know, and they've been happy to be a part of what we do, and it's a family, and it's nice. Yeah.
So thank you for that. I think that's I love that distinction. That's really, really cool. You mentioned community. What's the outrigger community like? Or for you?
Well, for me, it's all I know, right? Mm. I mean, I grew up in...
So talk about it.
But it's family, right? And what I hear a lot of people say when they come from other sports is, oh my God, I love the outrigger community. right? Because, I mean, back in the day when they had a regatta race, everybody would go to one house after, and there'd be a giant party and music and everything, and it's just having a good time with everybody. You know, it wasn't really dog eat dog, you know? And to me, that's the community. It's welcoming, we're doing this because of a tradition, but we're also pushing this limit to, I mean, if you look at the canoes, they're full aerospace, right? I mean, they're something that NASA would be making, is the way they're made. And we're just this community of people that came from fishing in wood boats, right? I love that. I think it's amazing. And people are usually pretty nice to each other in it.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be people with ego, but you go to most outrigger prone races, and it's not who won, it's who participated and who's there afterward. And you always celebrate the people that win, but they won't.
I always say it's not about. Yeah, so we put on a race from Catalina to here, right? Our Wild Buffalo Relay, and then people have a good time. And when Kelly, who does a phenomenal job, who works for me, when she said I want to go do a race, I said we don't do a race, we do an event. I go, nobody remembers who won a race. Maybe a couple people. Everybody remembers what it was like, how good it was after, how much fun did you have, what was it like interacting with people. So we do a 3-day event, right? We go 2 days on Catalina, hiking, talks. How can we make it something that people will remember, right? That's, to me, is what it's about, the community.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And thanks for putting on that race or that event every year. It was super fun this year. Thank you for having really good conditions. That was super helpful. I appreciate it. I did that solo and had a great time out there. And you had mentioned Kelly Schwartz that works with you and with NAC and puts on the majority of the events in Southern California. She's awesome. Johnny, what keeps you fired up on the sport?
Learning. I'm always learning something. The ocean, you know, I love my downwind runs. I'm doing more racing this year, like getting back into it a little bit. You know, it's been really fun. Downwind, like it's spending time in the gorge, or the downwind runs in Hawaii. And I've spent my life growing up in the ocean, so that's where I have my advantage. But I was out there, we did a run the other day and a few weeks back in Hawaii with a buddy of mine. The water was pretty intense and everything was moving around the top of it, and I couldn't see the big swell underneath of it. And I stopped with my buddy. I was with my buddy Kamalu, and I said, I feel like a beginner. I feel like a total novice right now. You know, and that's what keeps me going. I love that. Like the ocean, and it teaches you that you don't know much, and to stay on your toes and be humble and watch what's going on around you and pay attention. And then when it comes to design, right, I get super excited because we don't have limits on specs. So what's next? Like, what can you come up with in your head that's different out there that's going to be faster, right? And my dad's, you know, Puakea Canoes, my brother from my dad's first marriage, he was just at home with me a few weeks ago. He designs aircraft carriers.
Really?
So he and I sit down and we talk design, and you know, they got their thoughts and I got mine, and he looks at the canoes, and so we get to, you know, he and I and my dad are talking at breakfast, and my mom is chiming in. You know, she's 88, I think, and when I did my 2-man this year, I put the cockpits in it and I shaved the foam blank. She came up at the park and she says, right side looks a little different than the left. And I'm like, yeah, right. And I look over and I'm like, shit, she's right, you know. So we'll sit at the
Never second guess mom.
We're sitting at the breakfast table talking design, you know, and that keeps me going. I love that.
That's pretty special.
Yeah.
What a cool story, Johnny.
Yeah.
Listen, thanks for sharing all of that. Like, I promise there's stuff that people didn't know, whether it was the knife, the knife twirling, the fire throwing, whatever. I mean, what a cool story. But I love where you started with this, with the family in Hawaii and your experiences, and then bringing you all the way here. And you spent a lot of time here with us, which is super cool.
Oh, it's
and
super fun.
Dude, yeah. This is rad. Listen, before we end, I've got one question because it just stuck with me. We were talking earlier, and you told me, you're like, in the last couple weeks, you recognized something and you're taking a little bit more time. Just because I think it's such an important thing.
A couple years ago, I started this, you know, meditating in the mornings and just taking the time to try to clear my head, right? And, you know, you look at Steve Jobs, Jerry Lopez, these guys all They understand how to slow down your mind. And so I started playing with it and letting go more of not trying to control things. And, things, they get thrown at you. And if you got the right mindset, you can be okay with it, right? And you let go of the ego if you can, or whatever it is. And the last couple of weeks, I've had some hard things come my way a little bit. And about a couple of weeks ago, I said, okay, I'm done. I'm just going to chill out more. And maybe if I stopped getting up at 4:30 and trying to be the hardest working guy out there, maybe better things will come to me. Maybe I'll get better at what I'm doing. Maybe I'll have a clearer mind to come up with some kind of new design or some kind of new thing that helps with paddling. And it's been challenging. And I tell people, so yesterday with my daughter, she lives in Burbank, and I said, she goes, at 6 o'clock, let's have dinner. And I'm thinking, LA traffic, that is not me, right? So I go up at 2, and now I'm up there and I punched into the phone, parks around me, and I laid under a tree for a couple hours, right? So I told people, they go, that doesn't sound like you. And I go, this might be me now. I might get better at what I'm doing because of it, So
that's rad. I think everybody that's in here are high performers in one way or another. And so everybody's trying to figure out how to be the best selves and do the best in their work, family, passions, whatever it may be. So all those little, again, I think it's super interesting. The two people you noted was Steve Jobs and Jerry Lopez in the same thought, like two icons, Jerry Lopez from Surf and obviously Steve Jobs from Apple. Just really cool. I'm glad you're doing that. I should take we were talking, I should take a study on you for that. It's just
a chill pill,
Yeah.
And
I'm not good with that.
I never was either. I'm always told you can't sit still, right? Vacation, when did you take your last vacation? I'm changing it.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Johnny, listen, before we go, you've got an incredible online presence between your website and social media. You can learn all about your boats and everything. Where can people find you?
I think puakeadesigns.com for our business stuff. And I think there's a lot of YouTube. Just call me up. I don't know.
Yeah, cool. There is a lot of really good YouTube, whether it's coaching or about the boats. There's a lot of really good content on there.
I had people come up and say, hey, you want to do this? And we'll videotape it. And I just said, sure. And we did it. And pretty soon it was kind of going out there. So
kind of like this.
Yeah. So now I'm,
Awesome. Yeah. Johnny Puakea, thanks so much for taking the time to be here and sharing your story, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Rad. Thanks, buddy.